Hello friends and season's greetings. I welcome you to this edition of Bedtime Stories for Grown-Ups. It is time to unwind. Find yourself a place where you can relax. Once you have made yourself comfortable, take a deep breath. Your long day has finally come to an end. There is nothing left for you to do but to listen to these stories and fall asleep. And so, let us begin. Jimmy Scarecrow led a sad life in the winter. Jimmy's greatest grief was his lack of occupation. He liked to be useful, and in winter he was absolutely of no use at all. He wondered how many such miserable winters he would have to endure. He was a young scarecrow, and this was his first one. He was strongly made, and although his wooden joints creaked a little when the wind blew, he did not grow in the least rickety. Every morning, when the wintry sun peered like a hard yellow eye across the dry corn stubble, Jimmy felt sad. But at Christmas time his heart nearly broke. On Christmas Eve, Santa Claus came in a sledge heaped high with presents, urging his team of reindeer across the field. He was on his way to the farmhouse where Betsy lived with her Aunt Hannah. Betsy was a very good little girl, with very smooth yellow curls, and she had a great many presents. Santa Claus had a large wax doll baby for her on his arm, tucked up against the fur collar of his coat. He was afraid to thrust it in the pack, lest it get broken. When poor Jimmy Scarecrow saw Santa Claus, his heart gave a great leap. "Santa Claus, here I am," he cried out, but Santa Claus did not hear him. "Santa Claus, please give me a little present. I was good all summer and kept the crows out of the corn," pleaded the poor Scarecrow in his choking voice. But Santa Claus passed by with a merry "Hello!" and great clamor of bells. Then Jimmy Scarecrow stood in the corn stubble and shook with sobs until his joints creaked. "I am of no use in the world, and everybody has forgotten me." But he was mistaken. The next morning Betsy sat at the window holding her Christmas doll baby, and she looked out at Jimmy Scarecrow standing alone in the field amidst the corn stubble. "Aunt Hannah," said she. Aunt Hannah was making a crazy patchwork quilt, and she frowned hard at a triangle piece of red silk and circular piece of pink, wondering how to fit them together. "Well," said she, "did Santa Claus bring the Scarecrow any Christmas present?" "No, of course he didn't." "Why not?" "Because he's a scarecrow. Don't ask silly questions." "I wouldn't like to be treated so, if I was a scarecrow," said Betsy. But her Aunt Hannah did not hear her. She was busy cutting a triangle snip out of the round piece of pink silk, so the piece of red silk could be feather-stitched into it. It was snowing hard out of doors, and the north wind blew. The Scarecrow's poor old coat got whiter and whiter with snow. Sometimes he almost vanished in the thick white storm. Aunt Hannah worked until the middle of the afternoon on her crazy quilt. Then she got up and spread it out over the sofa with an air of pride. "There," said she, "that's done, and that makes the 8th. I got one for every bed in the house. and I've given 4 away. I'd give this away if I knew of anybody that wanted it." Aunt Hannah put on her hood and shawl and drew some blue yarn stockings on over her shoes, and set out through the snow to carry a slice of plum pudding to her sister Susan, who lived down the road. Half an hour after Aunt Hannah had gone, Betsy put a little red plaid shawl over her head and ran across the field to Jimmy Scarecrow. She carried her new doll baby smuggled up under her shawl. "Wish you Merry Christmas," she said to Jimmy Scarecrow. "Wish you the same," said Jimmy, but his voice was choked with sobs, and was also muffled, for his old hat had slipped down to his chin. Betsy looked pitifully at the old hat, fringed with icicles, like frozen tears, and the old snow-laden coat. "I've brought you a Christmas present," said she, and with that she tucked her doll baby inside Jim Scarecrow's coat, sticking its tiny feet into a pocket. "Thank you," said Jimmy Scarecrow faintly. "You're welcome," said she. "Keep her under your overcoat so the snow won't wet her, and she won't catch cold. She's delicate." "Yes, I will," said Jimmy Scarecrow, and he tried hard to bring one of his stiff, outstretched arms around to clasp the doll baby. "Don't you feel cold in that old summer coat?" asked Betsy. "If I had a little exercise, I should be warm," he replied. But he shivered, and the wind whistled through his rags. "You wait a minute," said Betsy, and was off across the field. Jimmy Scarecrow stood in the corn stubble, with the doll baby under his coat, and waited. And soon Betsy was back again, with Aunt Hannah's crazy quilt trailing in the snow behind her. "Here," said she. "Here's something to keep you warm." And she folded the crazy quilt around the Scarecrow and pinned it. "Aunt Hannah wants to give it away if anybody wants it," she explained. "She's got so many crazy quilts in the house, now she doesn't know what to do with them. Goodbye, be sure you keep the doll baby covered up." And with that she ran across the field and left Jimmy Scarecrow alone with the crazy quilt and the doll baby. The bright flash of colors under Jimmy's hat brim dazzled his eyes, and he felt a little alarmed. "I hope this quilt is harmless if it is crazy," he said. But the quilt was warm, and he dismissed his fears. Soon the doll baby whimpered, but he creaked his joints a little, and that amused it. And he heard it cooing inside his coat. Jimmy Scarecrow had never felt so happy in his life as he did for an hour or so. But after that the snow began to turn to rain, and the crazy quilt was soaked through and through. But not only that, but his coat and his poor doll baby. It cried pitifully for a while, and then it was still, and he was afraid it was dead. It grew very dark, and the rain fell in sheets. The snow melted, and Jimmy Scarecrow stood half up his old boots in water. He was saying to himself that the saddest hour of his life had come, when suddenly he again heard Santa Claus's sleigh bells, and his merry voice talking to his reindeer. It was after midnight. Christmas was over, and Santa was hasting home to the North Pole. "Santa Claus, dear Santa Claus," cried Jimmy Scarecrow with a great sob. And that time Santa Claus heard him, and drew rein. "Who's there?" he shouted out of the darkness. "It's only me," replied the Scarecrow. "Who's me?" shouted Santa Claus. "Jimmy Scarecrow." Santa got out of his sleigh and waded up. "Have you been standing here ever since corn was ripe?" he asked pityingly, and Jimmy replied that he had. "What's that over your shoulders?" Santa Claus continued, holding up his lantern. "It's a crazy quilt." "And what are you holding under your coat?" "The doll baby that Betsy gave me, and I'm afraid it's dead." Poor Jimmy Scarecrow sobbed. "Nonsense!" cried Santa Claus. "Let me see it." And with that, he pulled the doll baby out from under the Scarecrow's coat, and patted its back, and shook it a little, and it began to cry, and then to crow. "It's all right," said Santa Claus. "This is the doll baby I gave Betsy, and it is not at all delicate. It went through the measles, and the chicken pox, and the mumps, and the whooping cough before it left the North Pole. Now, get into the sledge, Jimmy Scarecrow, and bring the doll baby and the crazy quilt." "I have never had any quilts that weren't in their right minds at the North Pole, but maybe I can cure this one. Get in." Santa chirruped to his reindeer, and they drew the sledge up close in a beautiful curve. "Get in, Jimmy Scarecrow, and come with me to the North Pole," he cried. "Please, how long shall I stay?" asked Jimmy Scarecrow. "Why, you are going to live with me," replied Santa Claus. "I've been looking for a person like you for a long time." "Are there any crows to scare away at the North Pole? I want to be useful," Jimmy Scarecrow said anxiously. "No," answered Santa Claus, "but I don't want you to scare away crows. I want you to scare away Arctic explorers. I can keep you in work for 1,000 years, and scaring away Arctic explorers from the North Pole is much more important than scaring away crows from corn. Why, if they found the pole, there wouldn't be a piece an inch long left in a week's time, and the earth would cave in like an apple without a core. They would whittle it all to pieces and carry it away in their pockets for souvenirs. Come along. I am in a hurry." "I will go on 2 conditions," said Jimmy. "First, I want to make a present to Aunt Hannah and Betsy next Christmas." "You shall make them any present you choose. What else?" "I want some way provided to scare the crows out of the corn next summer, while I am away," said Jimmy. "That is easily managed," said Santa Claus. "Just wait a minute." Santa took his stylographic pen out of his pocket, went to his lantern close to one of the fence posts, and wrote these words upon it. "Notice to crows. Whichever crow shall hereafter hop, fly, or flop into this field during the absence of Jimmy Scarecrow, and therefrom purloin, steal, or abstract corn, shall be instantly, in the twinkling and a trice, turned snow white, and be ever after a disgrace, a byword and a reproach to his whole race. Per order of Santa Claus." "The corn will be safe now," said Santa Claus. "Get in." Jimmy got into the sledge, and they flew away over the fields, out of sight, with merry halloos and a great clamor of bells. The next morning there was much surprise at the farmhouse when Aunt Hannah and Betsy looked out of the window, and the Scarecrow was not in the field, holding out his stiff arms over the corn stubble. Betsy had told Aunt Hannah she had given away the crazy quilt and the doll baby, but had been scolded very little. "You must not give away anything of yours again without asking permission," said Aunt Hannah. "And you have no right to give anything of mine, even if you know I don't want it. Now both my pretty quilt and your beautiful doll baby are spoiled." That was all Aunt Hannah had said. She thought she would send John after the quilt and the doll baby next morning as soon as it was light. But Jimmy Scarecrow was gone, and the crazy quilt and the doll baby with him. John, the servant man, searched everywhere, but not a trace of them could he find. "They must all have blown away, Mom," he said to Aunt Hannah. "We shall have to have another scarecrow next summer," said she. But the next summer there was no need of a scarecrow, for another crow came past the fence post on which Santa Claus had written his notice to crows. The cornfield was never so beautiful, and not a single grain was stolen by a crow. And everybody wondered at it, for they could not read the crow language in which Santa had written. "It is a great mystery to me why the crows don't come into our cornfield when there is no scarecrow," said Aunt Hannah. But she had a still greater mystery to solve when Christmas came round again. Then she and Betsy had each a strange present. They found them in the sitting room on Christmas morning. Aunt Hannah's present was her old crazy quilt, remodeled, with every piece cut square and true, and matched exactly to its neighbor. "Why, it's my old crazy quilt, but it isn't crazy now," cried Aunt Hannah, and her very spectacles seemed to glisten with amazement. Betsy's present was her doll baby of the Christmas before, but the doll was a year older. She had grown an inch, and could walk and say, "Mama," and "How do?" She was changed a good deal, but Betsy knew her at once. "It's my doll baby," she cried, and snatched her up and kissed her. But neither Aunt Hannah nor Betsy ever knew that the quilt and the doll were Jimmy Scarecrow's Christmas presents to them. Little Girl's Christmas. It was Christmas Eve, and Little Girl had just hung up her stocking by the fireplace, right where it would be all ready for Santa when he slipped down the chimney. She knew he was coming because it was Christmas Eve, and because he always had come to leave gifts for her on all the other Christmas Eves that she could remember, and because she had seen his pictures everywhere downtown that afternoon when she was out with Mother. Still, she wasn't just satisfied. Way down in her heart, she was a little uncertain. You see, when you have never really and truly seen a person with your very own eyes, it's hard to feel as if you exactly believe in him, even though that person always has left beautiful gifts for you every time he has come. "Oh, he'll come," said Little Girl. "I just know he will. I just know he will be here before morning. But somehow I wish—" "Well, what do you wish?" said a tiny voice close by her. So close that Little Girl fairly jumped when she heard it. "Why, I wish I could see Santa myself. I'd just like to go and see his house and his workshop, and ride in his sleigh, and know Mrs. Santa. 'Twould be such fun, and then I'd know for sure." "Why don't you go then?" said the tiny voice. "It's easy enough. Just try on these shoes, and take this light in your hand, and you'll find your way all right." So Little Girl looked down on the hearth, and there were two cunning little shoes side by side, and a little spark of a light close to them, just as if they were all made out of one of the glowing coals of the wood fire. Such cunning shoes as they were! Little girl could hardly wait to pull off her slippers and try them on. They looked as if they were too small, but they weren't. They fitted exactly right. And just as little girl had put them both on and had taken the light in her hand, along came a light breath of wind, and away she went up the chimney, along with ever so many other little sparks, past the soot fairies, and out into the open air, where Jack Frost and the starbeams were all busy at work, making the world look pretty for Christmas. Away went little girl, two shoes, bright light, and all, higher and higher, until she looked like a wee bit of a star up in the sky. It was the funniest thing, but she seemed to know the way perfectly, and didn't have to stop to make inquiries anywhere. You see, it was a straight road all the way, and when one doesn't have to think about turning to the right or the left, it makes things very much easier. Pretty soon, little girl noticed that there was a bright light all around her. Oh, a very bright light. And right away, something down in her heart began to make her feel very happy indeed. She didn't know that the Christmas spirits and little Christmas fairies were all around her, and even right inside her, because she couldn't see a single one of them, even though her eyes were very bright and could usually see a great deal. But that was just it. The little girl felt as if she wanted to laugh and sing and be glad. It made her remember the sick boy who lived next door, and she said to herself that she would carry him one of her prettiest picture books in the morning, so that he could have something to make him happy all day. By and by, when the bright light all around her had grown very, very much brighter, little girl saw a path right in front of her, all straight and trim, leading up a hill to a big, big house with ever and ever so many windows in it. When she had gone just a bit nearer, she saw candles in every window, red and green and yellow ones, and everyone burning brightly. So little girl knew right away that these were Christmas candles to light her on her journey and make the way dear for her, and something told her that this was Santa's house, and that pretty soon she would perhaps see Santa himself. Just as she neared the steps, and before she could possibly have had time to ring the bell, the door opened. Opened of itself, as wide as could be, and there stood, not Santa himself, don't think it, but a funny little man with slender little legs and a roly-poly stomach, which shook every now and then when he laughed. You would have known right away, just as little girl knew, that he was a very happy little man, and you would have guessed right away, too, that the reason he was so roly-poly was because he laughed and chuckled and smiled all the time. Quick as a wink, he pulled off his little peaked red cap, smiled the broadest kind of smile, and said, "Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. Come in, come in." So in went little girl, holding fast to little man's hand, and when she was really inside, there was the jolliest, reddest fire, all glowing and snapping. Then there were little man and all his brothers and sisters, who said their names were Merry Christmas and Good Cheer, and ever so many other jolly-sounding things. And there were such a lot of them that little girl just knew she never could count them, no matter how long she tried. All around her were bundles and boxes and piles of toys and games, and little girl knew that these were all ready and waiting to be loaded into Santa's big sleigh for his reindeer to whirl them away over cloud tops and snowdrifts to the little people down below who had left their stockings all ready for him. Pretty soon all the little good cheer brothers began to hurry and bustle and carry out the bundles as fast as they could to the steps where little girl could hear the jingling bells and the stamping of hoofs. So little girl picked up some bundles and skipped along too, for she wanted to help a bit herself. It's no fun whatever at Christmas, unless you can help, you know. And there in the yard stood the biggest sleigh that little girl had ever seen, and the reindeer were all stamping and prancing and jingling the bells on the harnesses, because they were so eager to be on their way to the earth once more. She could hardly wait for Santa to come, and just as she had begun to wonder where he was, the door opened again, and out came a whole forest of Christmas trees. At least it looked just as if a whole forest had started out for a walk somewhere. But a second glance showed little girl that there were thousands of Christmas sprites, and that each one carried a tree or a big Christmas wreath on his back. Behind them all she could hear someone laughing loudly and talking in a big, jovial voice that sounded as if he were good friends with the whole world. And straight away she knew that Santa himself was coming. Little girl's heart went pit-a-pat for a minute, while she wondered if Santa would notice her. But she didn't have to wonder long, for he spied her at once and said, "Bless my soul, who's this? And where did you come from?" Little girl thought perhaps she might be afraid to answer him, but she wasn't one bit afraid, and you see he had such a kind little twinkle in his eyes that she felt happy right away as she replied, "Oh, I'm little girl, and I wanted so much to see Santa that I just came, and here I am." "Ho, ho, 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 ho," laughed Santa. "And here you are. Wanted to see Santa, did you? And so you came. Now that's very nice. And it's too bad I'm in such a hurry, for we should like nothing better than to show you about and give you a real good time. But you see, it is 11:15 now, and I must be on my way at once, else I never reach that first chimney top by midnight. I'd call Mrs. Santa and ask her to get you some supper, but she is busy finishing doll's clothes, which must be done before morning, and I guess we'd better not bother her. Is there anything that you would like, little girl?" And good Santa put his big warm hand on little girl's curls, and she felt its warmth and kindness clear down to her very heart. You see, my dears, that even though Santa was in such a great hurry, he wasn't too busy to stop and make someone happy for a minute, even if it was someone no bigger than little girl. So she smiled back into Santa's face and said, "Oh, Santa, if I could only ride down to earth with you behind those splendid reindeer. I'd love to go. Won't you please take me? I'm so small that I won't take up much room on the seat, and I'll keep very still and not bother one bit." Then Santa laughed, such a laugh, big and loud and rollicking. And he said, "Wants a ride, does she? Well, well, shall we take her, little elves? Shall we take her, little fairies? Shall we take her, good reindeer?" And all the little elves hopped and skipped and brought little girl a sprig of holly and all the little fairies bowed and smiled and brought her a bit of mistletoe, and all the good reindeer jingled their bells loudly, which meant, "Oh yes, let's take her. She's a good little girl. Let her ride." And before little girl could even think, she found herself all tucked up in the big fur robes beside Santa, and away they went, right out into the air, over the clouds, through the Milky Way, and right under the very handle of the Big Dipper, on and on toward the Earthland, whose lights little girl began to see twinkling away down below her. Presently she felt the runners scrape upon something, and she knew they must be on someone's roof, and that Santa would slip down someone's chimney in a minute. How she wanted to go too. You see, if you have never been down a chimney and seen Santa fill up the stockings, you would want to go quite as much as little girl did now, wouldn't you? So, just as little girl was wishing as hard as ever she could wish, she heard a tiny voice say, "Hold tight to his arm, hold tight to his arm." So she held Santa's arm tight and close, and he shouldered his pack, never thinking that it was heavier than usual. And with a bound and a slide, there they were, Santa, little girl, pack and all, right in the middle of a room, where there was a fireplace and stockings, all hung up for Santa to fill. Just then Santa noticed little girl. He had forgotten all about her for a minute, and he was very much surprised to find that she had come too. "Bless my soul," he said, "where did you come from, little girl? And how in the world can we both get back up the chimney again? It's easy enough to slide down, but it's quite another matter to climb up again." And Santa looked real worried, but little girl was beginning to feel very tired by this time, for she had had a very exciting evening. So she said, "Oh, never mind me, Santa. I've had such a good time, and I'd just as soon stay here a while as not. I believe I'll curl up on this hearthrug a few minutes and have a little nap, for it looks as warm and cozy as our own hearthrug at home. And why, it is our own hearth, and it's my own nursery, for there is Teddy Bear in his chair, where I leave him every night, and there's Bunny Cat curled up on his cushion in the corner." And little girl turned to thank Santa and say goodbye to him, but either he had gone very quickly, or else she had fallen asleep very quickly. She never could tell which, for the next thing she knew, Daddy was holding her in his arms and was saying, "What is my little girl doing here? She must go to bed, for it's Christmas Eve, and old Santa won't come if he thinks there are any little folks about." But little girl knew better than that, and when she began to tell him all about it, and how the Christmas fairies had welcomed her, and how Santa had given her such a fine ride, Daddy laughed and said, "You've been dreaming, little girl, you've been dreaming." But little girl knew better than that too, for there, on the hearth, was the little black coal, which had given her 2 shoes and bright light, and tight in her hand she held a holly berry which one of the Christmas sprites had placed there. More than all that, there she was on the hearthrug herself, just as Santa had left her, and that was the best proof of all. The trouble was, Daddy himself had never been a little girl, so he couldn't tell anything about it. But we know she hadn't been dreaming now, don't we, my dears?